that good?
Yeah, please. I mean,
Do you want to wait? I just made it live.
Okay, fine. That's also good. Hi, Punyansh. Hi, Deepak. Is that Seema Hardikar? Okay, I think let's keep to non-Indian times and start then, since we are all there. Those who have to come, they will come in. So, good evening and a cool welcome, I think I should say today, because it's rained in Bombay, and I can see Anita is with a cardigan, so I think it's cool in Nilgiris also. So, yeah, uh, climate change is affecting us. That's for a fact. And however much anybody wants to deny it, it's there in our face. 3 cyclones this year are enough to prove its presence. Uh, so, welcome to the final edition of 2020. I don't know whether I'm glad to say this or that 2020 is coming to an end, but this is our 8th year and this is the 12th edition of this year. We've not missed a single lecture series in this time period. To give you a little recap of how the lecture series started, it started at the Maharashtra Nature Park, the Mahim Nature Park in Bombay. And we've had largely ecology and environment and nature, wildlife related talks. They used to be in the physical form where there used to be the speaker physically in front of 50, 60, or 80 audience. And then we moved from there to a place called the Rishi Valmiki Eco School for 1.5, 2 years. We moved there. There we sort of moved a little towards more school children kind of related material. And then since March this year, we've been having virtual sessions, which has given us the opportunity to have speakers like Dr. Varghese, who cannot say that there's only one bus going from Nilgiris and I cannot come for your talk. Then I'm stealing from her words now. But yes, we've had a lot of speakers. We had Sahas Barve from the US, and we had Aparajita Datta, talking from Bangalore, or other people, from last session that we had, which was on numismatics. So we had from Oxford University, a friend of mine who spoke about coins and wildlife. Before we had Devdutt Patnaik, who spoke about mythology and nature and wildlife. So we're trying to sort of diversify a little and get related topics also come in. Conservation can happen through art, through music, through literature. Science is one of the forms. I think soon we probably also intend to get some politicians and some academics as to how through academia, through curriculum forming, etc. We did have one talk on green teachers and one talk on green families as to what is a green family and what constitutes that. So there's been a diverse spectrum of topics that we've covered, and 8 years has been, I think, a long time for us to continue that. So at the outset, I'd like to thank Dviti and Youthful India Foundation, who's been hosting this session for us this year and giving us this large platform, to have this online sessions. Uh, this session is also available live on Facebook, on our Facebook channel of the Sprouts Environment Trust. So let me start by welcoming Dr. Anita Varghese to give you a little background about her and her introduction. She and me, we go back literally close to 30 years when I had hair and she had dark black hair. And she was a batch senior to me from the Bhavans College in Andheri. It's Bhavans College has been literally a boiling pot for a lot of nature conservationists who've come out from there. There is Anish Andheria, there is Shashank Dalvi, there is a whole string, Dipti, who's so many of them graduated out from there. Of course, Farida Tampal, who was also Anita's batchmate and who's now with WWF in Hyderabad. So it definitely was a very important turning point and a learning space. And I also should, place the credit for WWF's Nature Clubs of India movement. I don't think there has been any more successful youth motivation movement that has happened in this country. No other organization has managed to replicate the mass outreach that they did to schools and colleges, and it was a fantastic movement. And Anita would remember we had gone to this NDA camp in Pune, which was a youth leadership camp, which was a nature leadership camp. And
Yeah.
from that, taking inspiration from that, we've designed our Sprouts Nature Leadership internship that is there, a year-long program from which about 30 or 35 graduates have survived me for 1 year and passed successfully and now are being eco leaders out in the world. So Dr. Anita Varghese, it's a little uh, surprising that starting off from Bombay. I remember this was a question which was asked when I was being interviewed in the Wildlife Institute, that from Bombay you're coming and coming to Dehradun or wherever to do conservation. So I said, Dr. Salim Ali and several other big people have been from Bombay, and conservation has, the Bombay Natural History Society has been a driving spot over there. So after doing her bachelor's in zoology from the Bhavans College, Anita went ahead and did her master's in ecology from the very famous Pondicherry University. And then she went ahead and did a doctorate in botany from the University of Hawaii. So you can see very, vast spectrum of things that she's moved from one to the other. And currently she is a director with the Keystone Foundation, which is located in the Nilgiris. She also leads the biodiversity team at Keystone, which implements action research projects and on human-wildlife interactions. A lot of people use the word human-wildlife conflict. I'm sure there are more things than just conflict between human and wildlife, and I think we need to use the more neutral term human-wildlife interactions. Besides that, she's also interested in apiculture, and she has some international publications on how honey can be sustainably harvested. Then restoration, ecology, field courses. She leads a lot of field courses and works with climate change. And her one of the major fortes of hers has been community-based conservation programs at the Keystone, where she leads a team of barefoot ecologists who are local indigenous men, women, and youth. And today's talk is going to be focused around what exactly is barefoot ecology. I think it's a very interesting and intriguing concept. She's also the founder of Nilgiri Natural History Society. Besides this, Anita wears various other hats, such as that she is the chair of the newly constituted Western Ghats Plant Specialist Group of the SSC IUCN. And a lot of people, I would encourage you all to become a part of this. There is a Facebook page which is there, and you can join that and contribute your observations, even if they are stray observations when you go trekking in the Western Ghats. Please contribute this data in this newly constituted group. Besides that, she's also a member of the Plant Conservation Committee of the SSC IUCN and Sustainable Use and Livelihood Specialist Group Steering Committee of the IUCN, and a Psychid Specialist Group of the SSC IUCN as well. And her interests largely lie in plant conservation, specifically sustainable use, non-timber forest produce, and how long-term population dynamics of harvested species or invasive plants, cycads, and forest trees can help mitigate relationships between people and nature, and how sustainable development can be harmonized. So over to you, Anita, and thank you again for accepting this, talk today. So we're so glad to have you here.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me, Anand. I've heard so much about the good work of Sprouts, and I must say that I think it's been this pandemic time that allowed us to, interact. And I'm happy to speak to all of you, and really great to meet all of you. So without much ado, we'll go into the presentation that I've planned.
Yes.
Yes, it's to take you through, let me just share the slide, yeah. So I hope you're all able to see the slide, yeah? Anand, you be my, yeah.
So just one request to everybody
Yeah.
that please type in your questions and we'll take them at the end. Or would you be comfortable taking them in between as well, or at the end would be better?
I think in the interest of time, at the end would be better. So then I can finish the story and
Yes.
then we can, yeah?
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. So that would be better.
You can type in the questions in the chat window as always.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, I know that this Anand gave a very extensive introduction. I will write a shorter summary next time. So without much ado, I want to talk about what I thought we'll talk about is about the work that we do on barefoot ecology. I know that this term especially is very interesting, and people say, like, what are you talking about? So I want to capture your attention, your interest with this term. A little bit before we go into the actual working of the Barefoot Ecologist, I mean, since I can't host you here, this is a view of our campus. This is all our offices here at Kotagiri is the name of the place. Keystone Foundation was established in 1993. Our mission is very simply put to work on the enhancing quality of life and environment, mostly with indigenous communities, mountains and biodiversity, and eco-development, using eco-development initiatives. Incidentally, I think today is the International Mountain Biodiversity Day, right? Yeah, okay. So here we are in the, yeah. So over the years, so this is 27 years, over the years, with all our several initiatives, essentially we're working at how to, the linkage between conservation, enterprise, and livelihoods. And we've hyped off several organizations as part of our work. We have a private limited company called Last Forest. We have a membership-based society called the Nilgiri Natural History Society. We are part of a large network over South and Southeast Asia called the NTFP Exchange Program. We also have a producer company with about 2,000 tribal farmers and NTFP collectors as members and shareholders of the community. And today we also have, it's the most recent organization that we've set up called the Nilgiri Foundation, which is based in San Francisco. And it essentially helps to network with several of our, with several collaborators that we have internationally. Okay, a little more pictures across our work, what our field centers look like. We have this very nice, well-lit canteen, which is now quite lonely without so many guests and training programs. Yeah, I think to this audience, what the Western Ghats Biodiversity Hotspot means, I don't think I need to dwell on this long, but essentially, this is where we're located. We work at the Western Ghats. I know that many times I've often heard people wanting to say, it is the hottest hotspot. It's really not something to be proud of, It means that we just have a lot more threats going on here. And I think globally, it is recognized that these threats are increasing. And recently also, the Western Ghats was highlighted as one of the most threatened biodiversity hotspots. So there's a lot more work to be done. And within this, at the tail end, towards the southwest, is where the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve is located. It's a 5,520 square kilometer area. It was the first biosphere reserve for India, declared by the Man in Biosphere Program of the UNESCO. And it's the first time that a biosphere was declared in India, which spans 3 states. So about 50% of the biosphere is in Tamil Nadu, 25% in Karnataka, and another 25% in Kerala. So it basically interconnects a lot of protected areas. There's a large protected area network from Satyamangalam Tiger Reserve to parts of BRT to Nagarhole, Bandipur, Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, New Amramlam Reserve Forest, Silent Valley, Forests of Coimbatore Division. So it's almost 75% of this biosphere is under the protected area network. And you'll see that we, as an office, we also have several, like this is Kotagiri, and we also have several locations of field centers across the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. And this is a map of the indigenous people across the Biosphere Reserve. So what I'd just like to share here is that political boundaries exist for management and governance, but they didn't exist with wildlife. Elephants move across this landscape. Several migratory species use this landscape as a contiguous landscape. And so also for the indigenous people, for instance, for the Kurubas of Tamil Nadu, their relatives are sitting in Attapadi in Silent Valley of Kerala. So also for the Kurubas of Karnataka who have relatives in Tamil Nadu. So for the indigenous people too, this is one contiguous landscape. It's not divided by political and state boundaries. And this is some pictures of what what this landscape originally must have looked like. These are photos from the Mukurti National Park. You'll see the grasslands and shola ecosystem that we strive so hard to protect. A lot of it is converted to tea plantations. This is the large economy here, but only about less than 15% of the landscape is under plantations like this. When we talk about the indigenous communities, this is one of the most well-known communities from the Nilgiris, a member of the Toda community. Again, some more Toda women who are here for a festival. This is a community called the Cholanaikan who live in Nilambur. I essentially left Bombay to do my master's in ecology and moved into human ecology because of these people. They are the last hunter-gatherers of the mainland. We have hunter-gatherers in the Andaman Islands, but on the mainland, these are the last group. And they are less than 200 people or 200 individuals in this community. She's one of my friends from there. And this is the Kota community, a community from the Nilgiris. This is somebody from the Irula community using a lot of non-timber forest produce. You can see weaving wild date palm or phoenix leaves into brooms is a big industry. She's from the Pania community, Mulukurumba. Mulukurumba people are agriculturalists. And of course, this landscape is shared with elephants, with the Indian Gaur. The Gaur is also there in my front yard. This is a picture from my home. So one's home is another's wilderness. And we also have the Nilgiri langur. We have several charismatic species, the tiger, the elephant, all of them moving. Now here's another charismatic species that we work on. And this is a species that several of you may already know, the cycads. They come from a very ancient stock and have evolved from the Jurassic period. And these remnants are there in our forests all across the Western Ghats, but lesser understood, poorly studied, and therefore conservation was quite poorly done, at least about 15 years ago. And several things that so we also been challenging this. What do we mean by charismatic species? And why are we so focused on some and not able to take in a whole host of species? Just to tell you the story of the cycad, for instance. It has separate male and female plants. They are dioecious. This is a female tree. And this particular, the plains cupid butterfly, needs the young leaves of the cycas to complete its life cycle. And there's a very interesting mutualistic relationship between the ants and the larvae of this butterfly. There's a whole story on this young leaf of the cycad that, unless you monitor and study, that you'd miss out. So here are some pictures of, what are the threats to the cycads. So this is a whole industry that thrives on using the pith of the male plant, or not the male plant, any of the adult trees. The pith is going into some kind of industry. And so this has put a lot of pressure on the populations in the wild. And here you'll see that these are the male cones, again, harvested clandestinely, going into a whole illegal wildlife trade. And this kind of awareness about the species, the threats to it, the potential of working on conservation action, we've been able to do it quite, I would say, quite effectively over the years by involving harvesters and local community members to then become stewards. So today we have a lot of people in the community watching over the cycad plants and informing forest department if ever there is an illegal harvest happening. So this is a team of young barefoot ecologists in one particular area who look after the cycads in their forest. So coming to the Barefoot Ecology program, this program basically is a group to train indigenous barefoot ecologists to monitor natural resources. It can be their forests, it can be their agricultural landscape, or the rivers that they live next to. And how do we design, implement a protocol for monitoring? One of the key takeaways from this program is that what are the ecological indicators for long-term monitoring? What is it that local people look at to say that a forest is healthy, or a tree is healthy, or an animal is going through some stress? What are those indicators that are locked in traditional ecological knowledge or the community's knowledge about the system? So this is something that we pay special attention to. One of our old friends, Rasu, so one of the important things about this whole traditional knowledge is that communities have to keep interacting with their environment. They have to be able to walk those forests, see those forests, uh, experience those forests for that knowledge to be generated, for that knowledge to be alive. And that's why it's really important for several of these communities to have access to forests. Um, yeah. So, this is a definition that we want to put forward, that they are community people. Who's a barefoot ecologist? They're basically community people who have traditional knowledge and have been trained additionally in observing, recording, and analyzing data. So you might ask, isn't this a bit like citizen science? Well, it is a form of citizen science, except that it seeks to incorporate their knowledge, their traditional knowledge, and they are also setting the goals of the program. They are also setting the questions. They are thinking what should we monitor, and they are part of the analysis and the application of the results. And a little later, I'll be showing you what I mean by that. So once again, I want, like, for all of us who've done work as ecologists and environmentalists, when we are out there in the forest, we're quite used to having field assistants, technical assistants, trackers. We are used to having community people with us. So here we want to reiterate that by a barefoot ecologist, we don't mean low-cost technicians. We don't mean that we're going to train people to do the field work on our behalf. That's not the aim of this program. The aim of this program is how do they start to be part of the whole program. And you'll see a bunch of charts in one of the slides. So this is where barefoot ecologists, they analyzed their data, they made simple calendars, they made simple maps, and they shared it with their own village in terms of what is the monitoring telling us. So to say several things, like this is Rangan. He's also a harvester, an NTFP harvester. And one of the things that over the years, he's accompanied me on several of the NTFP studies that I've been doing in this area. And today, Rangan's also trained in monitoring those trees. So many times when we go in with a research project, our projects are very time bound. They're bound by resources, funds. And always when you come out of the forest, you always have that feeling, I've done the monitoring for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but how does this continue? Change is not something that you can see in a forest in 2 years or 3 years, right? How do you capture that kind of long-term change? And this is where involving the community has been part of our work. So we have people who use the forest who are part of our Barefoot Ecology program. Today, I'm very proud to share this. It just came today in the Sanctuary Nature Foundation publication, where 2 of our barefoot ecologists, our women barefoot ecologists that we have been featured as forest farmers. And this is Valliamma. She's actually using a simple method that we've used to measure the depth of the water resource that they have. So for the women, they've been a little hesitant to go into the forests alone to do the monitoring of the forest. So we have designed this program, which is to look at the agriculture and the agroecology, diversity, and monitoring their agriculture systems. So these are our women barefoot ecologists. We also have several Adivasi or indigenous people living along river systems, especially in the Silent Valley and Nilambur area. And there we have a team of barefoot ecologists who are monitoring the ecology of the river. They're basically walking in transects, recording, observing, spending time, making notes on what they see. One of the skills that we recently trained them in is to make videos, short videos, and use cameras and to edit some of their footage. So they've been working on documenting using the camera. So this is a whole river transit group that's happening in Nilambur. So these are the different kinds of landscapes and resources that communities are monitoring as part of the Barefoot Ecology program. Over the years, we started from 2008. And in the beginning, it was all about forest transects. And then we started to also use mixed methods. So it was not only about ecological methods, but it was also about social science methods. So communities would interview people in their own village to find out how they were using the forest, what they were using. We did some specific species monitoring, like with honey, with cycads. And in 2019, when the women came on board, till about 2015, we had more men participating. And today we're really proud to have more than 21 women who are part of the Barefoot Ecology program. And we look at the agroecology. We're working along with Season Watch, this citizen science, large citizen science project across India that's looking at phenology. So we work with the Season Watch team to look at some of the trees and the phenology in this area. And the river transits is something that we have just initiated. Okay, so this is the little bit about the Barefoot Ecology and what we do. Now, I thought I'd take a little time off to come to a specific case of honey. As you'll know that honey is suddenly in the news for actually its poor quality. Suddenly, India has woken up to the fact, thanks to the CSE report, that a lot of the honey that we've been consuming, large brand names, trade names, have actually been more syrup and different kinds of additives and adulterants that have been coming into our honey. And that's where I really wanted to raise this question. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about how could a team like a Barefoot Ecology team contribute to understanding honey. So in this particular landscape, when we're talking about honeybees and social honeybees, there are essentially four groups there are three species and one, the trigona, and they are I think there are about two genuses that we know in the stingless bees. So these are the different kinds of native bees of India. And I was quite disappointed, I have to be frank, that I read yesterday an article by a senior scientist who's worked in bee research. He sounds like an agricultural scientist, very proudly saying that, our bees are Apis mellifera and they produce a lot of honey. But, that's not true, because Apis mellifera was introduced to our country. It was introduced and it has a certain role in an agriculture system. But it may have been at the cost of native bees and their habitat. And we have not done any kind of studies. We have all these, and a large percentage, about 20 years ago, when we did some kinds of market surveys, we came to understand that about 70% of honey in the Indian market was actually coming from the wild. Now, once it leaves the forest areas or those areas of collection, there's a whole lot of adulteration along the chain, which is the story of many of the natural products that come from our forests. Now, especially Apis dorsata, you've seen this, the Apis dorsata bees, which form the single hive combs and large congregations. They produce large volumes of honey, which have been harvested by traditional communities. And so also Apis florea, a much lesser understood. It's a bee species of the drier regions, and I believe also genetically one of the oldest bees and known as the mother of all bees. And then there is the Apis cerana, which builds its combs in in layers like this. Apis cerana is found widely, but again restricted to the Asia and a large, I think up to Nepal. Apis dorsata too has a restricted distribution across Asia. And here's finally the trigona species, or the stingless bees, which give a honey which has a medicinal property. and has been used widely in for medicinal purposes. Now, all of these honeys, they're separate. They taste different. They use different floral resources. They occur in different habitats. But you will never see any label saying that this is which honey is it. They'll just be honey, right? So these are some of the things that have been detrimental to the quality of the honey and to the bees and to the forest. So I'm just going to take a focus on this Apis dorsata bee. This bee, I think we've all seen in our lifetimes, I'm sure, because it's, I mean, I've seen them in the urban areas also. So it's not that it's only restricted to forest areas. They do need large ledges, or, they need, tall trees or large ledges to build their nests. And they've often been found under water tanks in cities and things. Yeah. So the Apis dorsata is a bee that the indigenous people have a relationship with. They know a lot about its biology, its ecology, its behavior, its migratory pattern. There's a lot of knowledge. And when we started out, there was a lot of knowledge that people shared about it. They, looking at the shape of the combs, they were able to say how much honey would there be, what kind of is the honey mature, and then they showed us how they take the honey, dropping rope ladders over cliffs, because these bees also nest on rocks and cliffs. So this is a picture from the lockdown. This is a picture which was taken, I think, in this honey hunting season in April. And a lot of the young people from the community who would normally have gone outside for labor decided to go back and learn from their elders, learn this ancient method of harvesting honey from the cliffs. So you can see the rope ladders they've dropped, and here are the giant combs from which they would harvest honey. And let me tell you that no fire is used. That's a smoker. Only smoke is used to shoo away the bees and to get to the honey. So now one of the things that, now this is a picture. So again, this is an old picture, 2007, when we sent cameras with some of the honey hunters when they went hunting, when they went to collect honey. And this is this is a smoker, and the bees have been moved away, which is why you get a good view of the comb. And this is the area where the brood is kept. This is the area where the honey is stored. And this in between orange is where the pollen is stored. Now, all of this is knowledge which the communities have. And they also know that by just removing the honey portion, they can keep the brood intact. And the bees will also rebuild the honey portion in 15 days. So this kind of a knowledge also exists with communities. And by giving an incentive to keeping these sustainable methods, we've also been able to keep the sustainable harvest as an important criteria for honey collection. Now, this is a bit of, so in the Satyamangalam Tiger Reserve area, which is part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, we had about 8 barefoot ecologists who were working with us for 2 years. And there was a period when the forest department said, that honey hunting is bad and they shouldn't be taking honey from the forest. So together we designed a method where we said we'd look at the different cliffs where honey harvesting happens. And we selected a number of cliffs, and we also looked at some cliffs across the whole landscape. And over a 12-month period of monitoring, where the barefoot ecologists went every 15 days to the cliffs, counted the combs, observed several parameters about honey harvesting. An interesting piece of information that they brought out was that what we saw was that by and large, the maximum honey harvest was in August. The red is where the number of colonies have been harvested, and blue was the number of colonies present. August was the largest time, the peak season of honey collection. And even there, you will see that not more than 40% of the existing hives were harvested, because it's physically not possible for them to reach all these areas. So this kind of information which a barefoot ecologist can, through monitoring, through a scientific monitoring process, can bring about, helps them negotiate and talk to the forest department with evidence and data about what they are doing in the forest. So this is one of the examples that I wanted to share. And I think this is really important to, right now when we're going through this whole question about, oh my God, all this honey I've been eating all these years has been fake honey. But if we did have a system in place where, there was traceability, there was accountability, there was a way to track back to the source and the status of the source, we could actually we would not have reached this place. So this is just something that I thought about and I wanted to share with all of you. And I'm coming to the end of my talk, and I wanted to say that I like this quote which I read in a certain paper recently. J. Mistry and Berardi, who work in the Cerrado in Brazil with communities that live in the swamp areas and the use of those swampy marshes. And one of the things that they said is, we're always trying to integrate these knowledge systems, but without going into about how can we make traditional knowledge more scientific, or how can we have scientific knowledge with more traditional. Let us respect its distinctiveness and engage with it. So, we're not trying to say one is better than the other, but how can we take all of this together is something that struck a chord with me, and I'd like to share that. And this is a picture from the Nilgiris taken by a good friend of mine, Anandi. This is when the Kurunji flowered, the strobilanthes flowered in our mountains about 2 years ago. And finally, the Barefoot Ecology program has received grants, ideas, and goodwill from several donors from 2008, from IDRC, the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, the Tamil Nadu Forest Department, People and Nature Fund, the Keystone Foundation, and more recently from the Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. And thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions now. Shall I stop sharing? Yeah. I can go back to my slide if needed. Yeah.
So I think that was, we got a window into one of the, unvisited areas. I don't know whether people from big cities generally visit you, Anita. Do they? Or do you have hordes of them?
No, not hordes, but we do have people visiting. And, Ooty is a tourist location, so there are people visiting. But they, of course, don't go to these places where I've shown you pictures from and everything. Yeah.
So if you've caught your breath, can have a sip of water. There are a few questions already lined up.
Okay,
And
sure.
request all the others also to start, typing in your questions. So for the first two questions are by Deepak Gurjar. The first question, he says, so what's in it for the barefoot ecologists?
Yeah.
How does it enrich their lives and make them feel more empowered and dignified?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Thanks, Deepak. That's a very good question. I agree. And, I must say that I have to look for projects to keep this running, because I don't expect the barefoot ecologists to do this gratis. I think time has to be compensated, and therefore there is a very small honorarium that's we always try to give. But there was one particular year when I had no projects, and this is when I wanted to start the program in Satyamangalam Tiger Reserve. And these 8 people who came forward said, when the money comes, you pay us. But right now we want to do this because we want to show the forest department that we also care about conservation, that conservation is also part of our ethic. So we are happy to be part of this program. And several times I've found that people may join the program because there is an honorarium there. But as we go along, they've been part of it, they've understood it, and they've been happy to participate. It has given them a certain kind of recognition, because the local forest department then calls them up, says, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Or, they share what they have seen in the forest with the forest department. They share their cameras, their GPSs, because the people also have GPSs. So they also participate with their equipment, and, so there is this information openness, which I think the barefoot ecologists find helps build the conversation with the forest department.
So next question is also by Deepak. He's saying very interesting to learn about beehive chambers, honey, pollen, and brood. So his question is honey harvested ethically, especially when it is done in apiaries for commercial use?
So I think this is a big question, Deepak, because I think this whole ethics of harvest and ethics is something that would require a larger kind of discussion. What I'm not happy about is that we do not recognize native versus invasive. Several areas could have potentially lost their native bees because we've introduced species. So the ethics of those kind of introductions, the ethics of how much sugar feed do you give and make these bees work day and night for you. These kind of issues are quite challenging. So that way, interestingly, the toadas who I showed you a picture of do a very interesting forest beekeeping. And there has been no understanding about how much those bees have been contributing to forest pollination, because these beekeepers just maintain those cavities in the trees and allow the bees to come back. I think there are several such systems. I think in Bhima Shankar we studied and we helped with a group that was doing this. So, the people have a relationship with the bees. They're calling them back, they invite them, they prepare their home for them, and the bees come, they give a portion of the honey. Indigenous people are also eating some parts of the brood. It's an important part of the protein in their diets. But there's a large role that the bees are playing in forest pollination. So all of these relationships, we've just not cared about it.
So if suppose we take, let's say, an Apis dorsata or something and actually introduce it in urban areas or in in orchards, etc., would that be more ethical, rather than getting an introduced or invasive new species from outside?
Yeah.
Because I've seen this in Uttarakhand. What I think one of the local NGOs has done is that they've created boxes in the walls of people, where the bees get warmth from the chulha, and they can stay over winter. They don't die in the cold otherwise, which is to happen, that the entire colony is to migrate down. So when they started doing this within the construction process, they are managing to maintain a population of the bees over there, which also, of course, was helping them with their orchards of
So Anand,
apricots.
that is not with Apis dorsata. Those are with Apis cerana bees, and that is a done thing. It's very not easy, but they are easier to domesticate. I don't think Apis dorsata can be domesticated, though there are examples of people providing rafters on which the bees come and settle. I think there are examples of that, but they're much more wild and not domesticatable, if I may say so. But definitely with Apis cerana, there's a lot of domestication. There's been a lot of pollination services that have been derived from Apis cerana. Why we suddenly chose the easy route through Apis mellifera, I don't know.
So Dr. Alkama Faki is saying, thank you so much for the interesting lecture. Enjoyed the session a lot.
Thank
Same
you.
with Dr. Ashish Nanabhai is saying very insightful into the concept of barefoot ecology. Next question is by Rashida Athar. She's asking, any association of trees and honeybees or observations of any particular species that are preferred?
Yeah, thank you, Rashida. That's, interestingly, I was just giving a few sound bites to somebody about the trees recently. So one of the studies earlier on, which came out from Southeast Asian forests, which experience a lot more logging, there was a direct relationship between the logging areas and the population of bees, because nobody factored this in that, when you cut down the trees, the bees are actually losing their nesting sites. So there was a huge drop in bee populations when logging took place. So there is definitely a direct relationship. We've also seen that there are a number of trees that they prefer. So we've actually published a paper in the Journal of Tropical Ecology about tree characteristics preferred by Apis dorsata. So we've had a chance to look at that, and we do see that there is It's usually based on the architecture of the tree is what we have derived from our study in terms of branching, crown cover, and also the texture of the bark seems to play an important role in bees choosing trees for nesting.
Right. Thanks. The next question is by Dulcie David. How is it economically sustainable? I think the bee
Honey.
honey extraction. Yeah.
Honey extraction, yeah. So that is where, definitely the branding, the marketing plays a very important role. So today the honey hunters, for instance, by just telling the story of who is collecting it, how are they collecting it, which forest, we've been able to market it at a much higher price than the normal market. And the honey hunters definitely get a larger share for being part of it. One of the other, so by creating a steady market, I think we're also able to absorb any volume that they produce. That's also an important aspect for the sustaining the market of any kind of NTFP or farm produce. Sometimes we start off these ventures and then we're not able to sell beyond a certain capacity, but the system produces so much that the harvesters also want you to provide that kind of a market, and we're able to do that and support the initiative. So the NGO, when we started, I was not part of the founding group. I've come more recently. So when we started, we gave equal emphasis to the business part, the ecology part, and the livelihood part. And even today, these three aspects, it's not that you start with one and then I'll look after the next. We moved all three aspects of these three pillars of sustainable development at the same time. And that impetus that all three have been able to, we've been able to sustain the economic part of it. Yeah, even during COVID times.
Yeah, that's I think quite a big challenge that a lot of foundations
Yeah.
are facing, funding drying out.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is by Dr. Ashish Hanabai. He's saying, is there an internship program for people who are interested? I'm sure you get this a lot.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I think there's how we do internships is, of course, if we have a specific question, we put it up on our website, and you can always get information about that. But the other way is that if you are interested, go to the website, see the people, what kind of work we do, because it's a very diverse team. We're about 60 people in Keystone Foundation, and there's people from economics, from social sciences, from ecology, wildlife, from marketing. So there's a whole lot of diversity here. So once you find a person or an area of work that you're interested in, we encourage you to email them, write to them, pick up a conversation, and an internship program that's sometimes worked out for people. Yeah.
Next question is also by Dulcie. What are the other NTFPs used for commerce?
Yeah, so Tamil Nadu has a certain number of NTFPs, about 20 of them, from Amla to Terminalia chebula to Bellerica, and then the broom leaf. There are some 20 of them there. So one thing about NTFP that we've also been working at, NTFP is not just the commercial ones that are used for trade, but there's a large amount of forest products that go into their food, into construction, cultural purposes, into several aspects of an indigenous person's life. So NTFP is not just the commercial ones, the subsistence ones are also very high.
So the next question is by Chinmay Himani. What beehives found on mountain or other terrains and not just trees? What attracts bees to build beehives there?
Interesting question, one which we are also exploring. Our long-term research, we've been looking at it. And definitely, I think there's something about like air circulation, wind parameters. They seem to be choosing areas which would allow a lot more air circulation. We think water is an important attractant. So it's not just the tree or the cliff, but there has to be a water source nearby. So there's several factors that are, but nobody's interested. There are very few people who are doing work on wild honeybees. Everyone's so focused on the beekeeping and the beehive, and that too in the more industrial production, that we've really neglected knowing about our native honeybees, and
So
especially
if,
their
if I
status
can,
in the wild.
right, if I can jump in here and combine a question with what Ashish had asked, was that like there are lots now, like Pondicherry has a master's in ecology. Bombay University now we have formed a course in biodiversity and wildlife conservation management.
Mhm.
There are students who need to do their thesis. Would they be able to come and do something like that? Would you all be able to host students of those kinds? Because there are a few of those in the audience.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. So
so
then let me.
I'll
Yeah,
put in
please be in touch. Yeah,
her
please.
email address. You can write in to them then.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I think I may have some good news for the students. We may even be able to support your internship here. So I'll know about it I know about it, but I'm not
Okay.
yet ready to announce it. So please do get in touch. We look forward to it. But there's only one aspect that I'd like to mention to students, and they get a bit disappointed when they come. These are protected areas, these are reserve forests. So you need to work on your permissions. And I know that, I'm sure Anand also knows this, that when we started out on our research work and we didn't have any NGOs or anybody to be giving us boarding, lodging. So today we're able in a position to give you that, but we cannot work on your permissions thing. That has to be your own, because that's part of the dissertation. How do you talk to a forest official? How do you work on getting your permission? So these are things that you'll have to also
Yeah,
be
I think
ready for.
wanting to become a field biologist or
Yeah,
you need to get to be able to write these proposals, funding as well as other things as well.
yeah, and permissions.
Permissions, yeah, permissions.
Permissions, yeah.
Deepak has again asked another question. What are forest transects and are they used in combination with other data points like satellite imagery, etc.?
Yeah. So yeah, Deepak, this is essentially, it depends if it's a river transect or it's a forest area. We ask people to have. I mean, we plan along transects. These could be at distances beyond 1 kilometer. They're not usually transects in terms of they're not straight lines. They're not like how we do census techniques. So they're usually along tracks that people walk in the forest. So yes, they have a sort of distance calculation, so you can get to some kind of density calculations from that. But right now, we're also very conscious of the fact that this is a barefoot ecology program. The data is about the people. The data is for the people. It's a question they want to ask. So while we have all of these geocoordinates, we do have a lot of this mapped. We're going to keep that management of the data at the level that the people can manage it. So yes, they are transects. Yes, they have coordinates. They can be linked to imagery. They can be analyzed should we need it, and should the forest department want to be part of such a program. Yeah.
Now this is an interesting question coming from Vikram,
Mm-hmm.
who he is a conservation architect,
Mm-hmm.
so human heritage in that form. So his question is, can you give some insights about the difference in architecture of the comb of different species beyond its organization? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is
Yeah,
there?
it's Vikram, it's fascinating because I haven't. I must say that I'm not the bee expert in my organization. I don't. I look at other aspects of biodiversity, but I've been reading and I've been listening to my colleagues who speak about it, and it's amazing. There's the kind of I'm sure there's a lot of there's been a lot of evolution in the lengths of those tubes. Each of those cells has a certain depth. So then the honey is actually in little comb. It's sort of sorry, what should I call them? Yeah, in cells that are deeper. So those are the deeper cells are where the honey is stored. The shorter cells are where the pollen is stored. There's a whole lot of interesting, and then there's a lot about How does such a heavy structure sit on a thin, narrow branch, right? There's a whole lot of balancing, a lot of physics that's involved there.
Have
And
you done like weights also, weighed them as well as to what is their absolute weight or that stuff
well,
like that?
from
Or,
one comb, if we've harvested, I would say on an average 15 kgs of honey. So can you imagine that this comb, which has 100,000 bees plus 15 kgs of honey, sitting on a twig of a tree, what all is factored into that construction? I think an architect can do a dissertation on this. And also the nature of the combs. So the dorsata has this single comb, the serrana has these sort of layered combs. The floria has a single comb, but it's always circular. It has the honey storage above the twig, whereas the apis dorsata has the honey storage below the twig. Why, where? I'm not the expert. I just know out of my interest.
okay, so apologies if it became like a honeybee questionnaire for you, but I'll ask you. This is my personal
No, no,
question.
no, no. I always
Uh,
expect if I was the one who put in a honey example. So
exactly, yeah. No, so but I had this ecological kind of question. Is that uh, we're seeing and we're knowing that a lot of climate change issues are affecting high
mm,
elevation spaces and species are moving upwards. So,
hmm
is the community aware and are they concerned and are they also documenting as to how climate change and its implications or its reflections are being shown ecologically? So, are the current group of people studying something like that, or are you all thinking of what are the climate change related studies that you all are doing?
yeah, yeah. So frankly, when in the one of my slides I talked about ecological indicators, and like bees become a very important indicator. Several of them are migratory. And their migration is determined by the flowering pattern, by the rainfall, by temperature differences. There have been years when the bees have come, but they've left in 15 days. The bees have not stayed for the usual 3 months. So these are different, these are indicators that we are seeing of changes in climate. But we're not putting pieces of that puzzle together, and we are not able to look at it holistically. So this is something that we hope that in the years coming ahead, we can develop into a strong program, because today we have about 50 barefoot ecologists who have been trained by us, and we know that they have the interest and they know the methods. So there is a sort of observatory, a people's observatory that we could set up on climate change related processes. And this is something that we're exploring and wanting to do very much. Yeah.
Because
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was this Dragonfly India meet, and there was a student who was studying butterflies in the Nilgiris, and
Huh.
her PhD thesis showed that a lot of the high elevation butterflies who used to be existing in a large range have now got pushed up, and they're the lower elevation species are moving upwards and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. So
Absolutely, because I'm just in my backyard, thanks to our Bombay days of Sanjay Gandhi Borivali National Park birding, the kind of birds. I mean, I never saw several lower elevation species before, but today we have miners. We never used to have crows. Today we have drongos coming up, things that we never saw at this elevation of 2,000 meters. So these range shifts are happening. Species are sort of being pushed, but we don't know what the push or the pull factor is.
right.
So, but there are a lot of shifts. That's all I can say.
Uh,
Right.
so Anita Gandhi is saying that research says that bees leave the hive if mobile tower radiation is there.
Yeah.
Is that true? Or what do you
Yeah.
say?
It needs to be studied, because we have these kind of observations from other countries and other areas, but we haven't done enough studies in our own landscape. And again, I come back to the thing that we've just forgotten about our native bees. We've just forgotten about this wild populations that actually provide us all the honey that we are eating. Uh, and so we really don't know, but it's a highly probable theory.
There's a question I'll take from our Facebook Live,
Okay.
observer. So Mahendra Khanpekar is saying, what do we know about behavior of bees? Anything recently investigated by
Uh,
the Barefoot Ecologists?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think in terms of behavior, I don't know if we can say, but definitely about their migratory patterns that we've been seeing. For instance, one thing that they brought up recently also is that they observe that whenever, so in some areas, the agriculture farms are let out for contract farming. And they've noticed that every time a marigold contract comes up and marigolds are planted, the bees are not coming. They feel that the bees are dying, and they feel the bees are sort of moving away from the area. This is something that I heard recently in this area. Again, need to be investigated.
Investigated.
This relationship of bees and agriculture inputs, pesticides and fertilizers, what's it doing to our local bees is something that we need to investigate.
Another question that I had was that is like food and ecology. Like, in Maharashtra, there are a lot of forest foods which are being consumed by people. What is the change of distribution or consumption patterns? Have they changed? As has a lot of rice and several other urban, food. Are people looking at reviving or going back to traditional food species? So, is there some documentation of traditional foods and plants being done with
Yeah.
your team?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of that. And this is something we've been doing since 2008. So there has been a lot of, let's say that the public distribution system is there. It's reached every remote village in our area. So people have it as their staple food. Yeah, but there is an interest, there is a sort of you rightly said, a revival of traditional foods, an understanding that the what we got from the government helps satisfy our hunger, but not necessarily our nutrition. So there is that whole revisiting and re-imbibing those traditional foods. One of the big programs that we have in Keystone is to support traditional agriculture, and this we've been doing since 1993. That just providing people the seeds, open pollinated seeds to different, food crops that they could grow in their area. So this has definitely been something that we see. And we've also seen it as part of our network program, where we've been encouraging people to document it. And then we've created little books. Each little botanical book has about 50 plates, which is about their wild foods, which is about the foods that they used to eat. And these books we've also printed in the local language so that the local children get to know about it. And this was not because we felt the need. Some of the elders met us and they said, you're doing all this documentation, but we want documentation for our children, for our communities. So this has also been one of the efforts that we've been taking up. Yeah.
So just for everyone's information, I'm adding the website of Keystone Foundation, so you can look up more of their work about the publications that Dr. Varghese mentioned, so that you can also, and email addresses, etc. Okay, there are one or two few interesting questions, Anita, that have now suddenly, people are warming up to very interesting questions.
Yeah. Okay.
So Chinmay is asking that strange thing, wouldn't flowers like marigold attract bees and butterflies?
Sorry, how was it?
Wouldn't marigold attract bees and butterflies?
Yeah, but I think it's, which is what I'm also intrigued by. But I think it may also be because of the inputs. I don't know what kind of inputs they are putting into these flower crops.
Right. If they are using fertilizers or other chemicals.
Yeah.
But I would also like to say that in urban agriculture, I like what I teach is that if you brinjal gets a lot of moth infestation, and marigold is planted as a companion plant to keep away the pest.
Absolutely.
So these do have pesticide properties which Germans and others have exploited. So it might be deterrent to these bees for maybe.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought too, because in the integrated kind of farming systems, we use marigold as a pest repellent. Yeah. So I was also like, what's happening here?
Now, Abha Sharma is asking how urban centers should support biodiversity of urban areas and hinterlands based on what your experiences are.
Yeah. And Abha, like I would like to say that here, me sitting in the biosphere reserve, but I'm living in a town. and our interactions are increasing day by day. Just for an example, like last night, we have a issue in our town because a bear and her cubs are just breaking into people's houses, literally breaking open the doors and increase. So in that kind of a scenario, how do we support coexistence? How do we, keep people calm? I know that urban areas, for instance, with your work, with Bombay's work on leopards and managing that kind of interaction and conflict, there's a certain kind of coexistence is a big word to use, but there is a certain kind of understanding and a way to live with nature. I think we have to develop that. And today it's not just rural areas, but urban areas, and all of us have to have these shared spaces. And how we allow for that is something each of us will discover. Yeah. I never thought we would, like sitting here in the Biosphere Reserve, I never thought we would have to run an urban wildlife rescue unit. But today we have, every day we have calls because the human settlements are increasing, human population is increasing in this area. Therefore, the interactions are increasing. So,
What are largely the species that you all get for rescue?
for rescue, mostly snakes that we have to this thing, and of course, leopards. We have the gore falling into wells. This is the recent thing. So, from gore to snakes, we have everything.
Next is by Milan Das. Lichens are one of the bioindicators. Can you tell some insights and recent studies of lichen that have been done, and how effective was that?
Yeah. Milan, I don't know about, I don't know any studies, and I myself have not done except to document and inventorize them and create some posters and information about it. But we haven't done in terms of has their population increased, has it decreased, so these kind of things are very important questions, and we should take it up for further studies. Yeah. But thank you for asking that question. I think it's very important. Never forget the lesser known species.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Shanmugam has asked a question, but I'm going to intervene as a moderator and take that over here. So he's asked about how radiations affect sparrows and honeybees. But what about mosquitoes? They should have become devoid by now? So I think, and Anita has responded saying that mosquitoes are in trillions and one wouldn't know if they're dying or no. But Hopkins Institute is doing studies on mosquitoes and what are the triggers and what control mechanisms, etc., can be used. So I think it's a little beyond the purview of this talk, to look at mosquitoes and the impact of radiation to them.
Yeah, but yeah.
I had another question. If you remember that when we had met in Bombay, you had mentioned about gaurs coming into gardens, or like you mentioned about the sloth bear now. So, are there any studies of behavioral changes between, let's say, orchard owners, or how is the response, and the communities, the kurbas or the thodas, their attitude? Is it becoming aspirational? Are they also changing a little in their or are they yet tolerant to the wildlife as compared to estate owners or orchard owners? Is there a big difference as yet?
Yeah. So, one of the things that early on in our work we figured is the animosity builds up once you lose property or lose life, right? And today, when you decide, like earlier, if it was an estate or a large plantation, it's a large tract of land. But today, when all these estates have been fragmented and gone out for housing plots, so the size of your property is much less. Then you will have a wall around it, you'll have a fence around it. So the first kind of damage you will experience is with the animals breaching the fence, damaging the fence. So already you've experienced a property loss which can be quantified economically. And that starts to work on people. I know they say, I've lost so many thousands worth of material and things like that. So this definitely starts to play on people's behavior and the way that they interact. By and large, actually, today in the afternoon, I was talking to one of my colleagues and saying, I think finally Indigenous people are very happy. They said, these many years when we had this conflict, you all said, Array, get out of the forest, come and live in the towns. Now, what are you going to do about it? It's here in the town. and now you handle the conflict, right? So I think there's a certain sense of justice that people feel, and that today it's everybody's problem. It's not just their problem.
And the second question that I had, and whether y'all work on these things, something that these Mumbaikars for SGNP did extensively, was that with news media and with politicians, are y'all, do you feel that they are, as powerful stakeholders, they are helping conservation, or they're really creating more animosity among people in conservation?
It depends on the state. For instance, I would say in the Nilgiris, by and large, we've also worked with the media, and there is a certain kind of sensitive portrayal. There's a sensitive reporting, except for one or two papers. But still, people by and large have that kind of attitude. And the forest department has been very responsive in sort of paying compensations and looking after people's needs. Having said this, I find that on the Kerala side of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, there's a lot of tension. Politicians have been using, and the nature of the conflict is also bigger because it's tigers. The density of tigers is very high in that Wayanad area, and people are there are much more incidences of interactions, and elephants, of course. So it also depends on the nature of interactions, and those are small farmers who also have there are large farmers, but there's also farmers with 1 acre, 2 acres. So the scale of the problem also varies. And that's where the behavior of the whole situation also changes. So we have different scenarios here in the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. I wouldn't say it's all one kind of picture.
Uh, okay, 1 second. There are a few more questions. Are you up to taking a few more questions?
Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Okay.
No.
So this is from again the Facebook Live.
Mhm.
Uh, what do you think about exploitation of honey hives? Brutal method of extraction by researcher for its own purpose. The
Total
ethics of
mess.
research is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
basic of honey.
I mean, I didn't understand the question. The ethics of research on honeybees.
What do you think about exploitation of honey hives and brutal method of extraction by researcher for their own purpose?
I don't know about any brutal methods by researchers. I've only seen observational studies. Have there been some kind of sample collection? I'm not aware. So, and also, I think
You probably
this
mean
is
the barefoot ecologists, but
ha ha. Anyway, I think there's also a lot of discussion about whether honey harvesting from the wild is ethical and whether it is to be permitted. There's a lot of, um, yeah, there's a lot of yeah. I mean, there's a lot of disagreement on this.
so
Um,
if I can maybe lay this question threadbare to you. Just day before yesterday, I had posted a picture. We had a beach walk, and there was a community the fisher folks who had from a dragnet they had got out their catch, and I took a picture of that and put it out saying that people who are privileged living in urban areas who have a lot of alternative foods that they can consume and go to malls and whatever and buy that, they are raising ethical questions about historical food
yeah,
methods or behaviors
yeah,
and whether they are ethical or no. So I think that needs a much larger discourse, do you think? And
yeah.
things which people have been doing for hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, I definitely think, and I think it's in the purview of what we're trying to do with our work on sustainable use in India. So globally, there is a movement to get sustainable use and livelihoods understood. Sometimes what happens in that is it's driven by, again, like you said, affluent people who have a lot to gain from the trophy hunting. So they sort of move but what happens there is they have the voice, they have the political uh, sort of visibility that is needed to bring laws and things. So whereas sustainable use for us may mean a little bit of fishing, a little bit of hunting, a little bit of collection of wild foods, but for that lobby it's all about trophy hunting. So there are several discourses out there, and I would think it's important, if you're genuinely interested, it's important to be part of those discourses, because then we sort of get an idea of the balances that are there, that are needed. That one man's wilderness is another man's home, one man's home, one woman's home, like mine, is another person's wilderness. So these kind of dichotomies that are there are better understood if we get into those debates and participate. Because then we see that there's not just one way of looking at a problem, or there's not just one solution.
And
Yeah.
not one correct answer that might be
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah. I think as ecologists, we've understood that early, that there is no one theory, right? Yeah.
I think it's almost 5:21. I'll take one last question from my side if nobody else has any questions.
Okay.
Is that you are located in the heart of Nilgiri Biosphere Reserves? Do you think biosphere as a concept, what the UNESCO had envisioned, and since you are there, is it functioning, and should we have more biosphere reserves because it has man and the ecological sphere together? Should that be, how can that be nurtured if other places want to create biosphere reserve, or is it a failed concept? What would you feel?
I think it was a concept before its time, which is why it probably didn't get so much traction. Going forward, I think this is how we have to, because I think the problems for conservation have come up because of the disconnect that we have with nature and the environment. And I think a biosphere reserve forces us to rethink that connection. So, and to rebuild. It's a chance, it's an opportunity, even for me who came here 25 years ago from Bombay. It's a chance for me to rediscover that relationship with nature and to connect again. So I think the biosphere is an idea that has to be supported for the future, and it is probably the way forward. Yeah.
And would you like to also tell people how they can contribute towards the Western Ghats plant conservation program?
Yeah. So, actually, let me just say that I would like to thank you all for being, part of this talk and asking interesting questions. I enjoyed this conversation. I wish we could do this physically. We would have more conversation. What I'd like is that if you would like to participate in any way to contribute to it's not just a database, it's a network of people who are going to work along the Western Ghats. Each of us in our little niches and silos has been doing things, whether it's restoration, whether it's documentation of species, whether it's taking a good photograph, whether it's observations. This is a forum which we hope to connect all of us to sort of advocate for more conservation in the Western Ghats. If you're interested, and if you are either doing a nursery, or you're doing some planting, or you want to just be with plant enthusiasts, please get in touch. And I know my passion is plants, but I work for biodiversity. So every living organism matters. It's not just plants. But I think currently there is a certain kind of plant blindness that we all suffer from. We have key biodiversity areas, we have important birds, important IBAs, we have several demarcations, but we don't have anything for plants. So that is the only reason where we've put it forward as a plant group, but that doesn't restrict us from working on biodiversity. It should just give us more focus. So please do get in touch if you would like to be part of the group and to get a membership. Yeah. Thanks, Anand, for making me more famous, putting my...
Yeah, I put Dr. Anita's email address in the chat. You can definitely write to her, look up at their website. And I think even individual contributions, financial, as well as, if you think you have any technological, if you're into, programming, or at NCBS, they have created a database that is there. If you think you might be able to help them database their work better, or put it out. If you're a designer, you can help them make very interesting booklets or other things. You can definitely, filmmakers, I think, can definitely be helpful with something like that. I always feel that we need to have a symbiotic approach to what work others are doing, and that's also one of the ideas of this lecture series, that we bring to you work that is happening in isolated areas, which might not be put out in Bombay or Delhi or New York's newspapers every day. but definitely the work is very, very phenomenal and very important to be highlighted for us to partner with. So thank you, Anita, so much for
Thanks,
this
Anand.
fantastic talk. And I think it's really opened out. At least people are now thinking in terms of smaller species of pollinators, of honeybees, of how communities can get involved in conservation and in documentation. I would also like to thank Mahesh Samant and Viti Das from Youthful India for hosting this session again. For all of you all to join in, and next month's session, January, we might have a conference on sustainability. I'm not sure as yet, but we will definitely let you know whether we will have one lecture or we'll have a whole series of lectures. So do look out for our either it might be a second Saturday or a fourth Saturday of January. So we'll let you know about that. And thank you once again,
Thank
and
you.
all stay safe, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.